On an otherwise ordinary day in Washington, D.C., two young members of the West Virginia National Guard began their routine patrol. Their duty was simple but solemn: guard the capital of the United States and protect the heart of American democracy. They stood watch not in a war zone, not on foreign soil, but on the streets of their own nation's capital, a place they believed was safe, a place their families believed was safe. But in a matter of seconds, that belief was shattered. It happened without warning. A man stepped out from behind a corner and opened fire. The shots were fast, deliberate, unmistakably planned. Both guardsmen were hit, collapsing to the pavement as chaos erupted around them. First responders rushed in. Sirens filled the air. Civilians ran for cover. And in those moments, America collectively held its breath. Two families would soon receive life-altering phone calls. A nation would soon face a chilling question. How could such an attack happen here, in the shadow of the Capitol dome? How could two National Guard members be ambushed on American soil by someone they never saw coming? Within hours, investigators delivered an answer that stunned the country. The shooter, who survived the encounter after being shot by responding forces, was identified as an Afghan national who came to the U.S. during the 2021 evacuation. He had entered legally. He had received asylum earlier this year, and according to early reports, he was not cooperative with investigators. That revelation ignited a firestorm in Washington, the media, and across the nation. President Donald Trump addressed the nation swiftly and forcefully. In one of his most direct statements since taking office again, he called the attack an act of terror, planned, intentional, and rooted in hatred. Trump expressed condolences to the families, promised justice, and then pivoted to policy. He announced a full review of every Afghan brought into the United States under Operation Allies Welcome, a program launched during the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. He argued that the evacuation was rushed, that vetting was insufficient, and that the nation was now seeing the consequences of those decisions. According to the president, this attack represented the gravest national security threat America now faces. For many Americans, especially seniors, veterans, and those who prioritize law and order, his words resonated deeply. They saw the attack not as an isolated event, but as part of a growing pattern of failures in immigration and security systems. But across the media landscape, the response was far from unified. Some networks highlighted the tragedy and praised the bravery of first responders. Others questioned why National Guard troops were deployed in the first place and whether Trump's policies had put them in harm's way. Commentators on MSNBC even suggested that the president was distracted by unrelated political statements, implying that this tragedy was, in some indirect way, tied to his leadership decisions. The debate quickly shifted from the attack to the politics surrounding it. Yet the central issue remained: vetting. Who exactly was brought into the U.S. during the Afghanistan evacuation? Were proper checks conducted? Did the urgency of evacuation override the need for security? Between 70,000 and 100,000 people were airlifted out of Kabul in mere weeks. It was one of the largest humanitarian operations in modern history, and it was conducted in an environment defined by chaos, fear, and collapsing security. Witnesses reported people flooding airport gates, boarding flights without documentation, and bypassing traditional screening. Military leaders later admitted that individualized interviews and thorough background checks were often impossible under the circumstances. Before 2021, the Special Immigrant Visa Program had required extensive vetting, biometrics, interviews, years of background evaluations. But during the evacuation, many arrivals entered under humanitarian parole, a temporary status that lacked rigorous vetting. Congress attempted to piece together what happened during the intake process, but officials struggled to provide precise answers. How many evacuees were vetted? How many were interviewed? Where were they resettled? The lack of clarity raised red flags. Meanwhile, violence against law enforcement nationwide has surged. According to the Fraternal Order of Police, nearly 300 officers were shot this year, with dozens killed and a growing number targeted in ambush attacks, the same style used against the guardsmen. Immigration-related violence has risen as well. Assaults on ICE officers reportedly jumped tenfold in a single year. The message, repeated through politics, media, and activist rhetoric, that law enforcement is the enemy has emboldened extremists. In a viral video following the attack, one woman even said she wasn't surprised the guardsmen were shot, arguing that when the government declares war on people based on racism, and hate violence becomes inevitable. The rhetoric has consequences. Trump's reaction was swift. He ordered an additional 500 troops to secure Washington, D.C. He promised a complete reassessment of every Afghan evacuee's case, and he declared that anyone who does not love America will be removed. This moment is not just about one attacker, one patrol, or one decision. It is the culmination of years of warnings that went unheeded, processes that were bypassed, and risks that were underestimated in the rush to evacuate Afghanistan. 2 National Guard members paid the price. Their families will never forget this day, and neither should America. Because the question looming over the country now is not just, how did this happen? The question is, will we ensure it never happens again? There was a moment recently, quiet, subtle, and easy to miss, that perfectly captured the level of political division America now faces. During a street interview, a woman was asked about the violent attack on 2 National Guard members. Her response was chilling. "What do you expect?" she said. She implied that violence was a natural response to Donald Trump's policies. Think about what that means. She was suggesting that enforcing immigration law, a basic function of government, was equivalent to declaring war. And more disturbingly, she was rationalizing the idea that attacking American service members could somehow be understood, even justified. This isn't political disagreement, it's radicalization. It's the type of rhetoric that pushes ordinary people toward dangerous conclusions and makes them believe extreme behavior is acceptable. And it's exactly the kind of rhetoric that Trump and his supporters have been warning about for years. They argue that demonizing law enforcement, border agents, and military personnel has created an environment where some people feel emboldened to attack anyone associated with national security or enforcement. But the problem doesn't end there. On the opposite side of the political spectrum, another controversy was already brewing, one involving several Democratic lawmakers under scrutiny for encouraging military personnel to disobey orders. A group of Democratic members of Congress, including some with military backgrounds, released a polished, highly produced video months ago. In it, they told service members that they had a duty to refuse illegal orders from President Trump. On its face, the message seemed reasonable. After all, the U.S. military teaches that following an unlawful order is unacceptable. This principle dates back to the Nuremberg trials after World War II, where just following orders was rejected as a defense against atrocities. But there was a glaring problem. The video never identified which orders were supposedly illegal. It didn't give examples, evidence, or context. Instead, it implied that Trump might issue unlawful commands and that soldiers should be prepared to refuse them preemptively. This created a cloud of suspicion around routine, lawful military directives. It seeded doubt in the minds of young service members without providing clarity. And when doubt enters a chain of command, discipline begins to erode. Now, after the attack on the National Guard personnel, the Justice Department has opened an investigation to determine whether the video constitutes sedition or an attempt to undermine military discipline. Federal investigators have requested voluntary interviews from the lawmakers involved. One of them, a former Navy officer turned congressman, went on CNN and declared he would not participate. He called the inquiry political persecution and insisted he was only reminding troops of their constitutional responsibilities. But that same lawmaker is now fundraising off the controversy, sending mass texts and emails urging supporters to donate so he can fight back against what he calls a weaponized Justice Department. So here's the situation America finds itself in. On one side, a president insisting the system failed and that stronger security measures are needed. On the other side, lawmakers claiming that the president himself is the danger and that military personnel should question his authority. Caught in the middle are the people who serve, the men and women in uniform who just want to do their jobs without being turned into political pawns. They signed up to defend the nation, not to navigate a political battlefield. For everyday Americans watching this unfold, it's messy. It's exhausting. It's confusing. But underneath the shouting and the finger-pointing lies a real, substantial policy question. How should America balance compassion for refugees with the obligation to protect its citizens? This is not an either-or issue. It is entirely possible to be humane and vigilant at the same time. But doing that requires something the government has lacked in recent years: competence. Competence means having systems that work, It means vetting people thoroughly before allowing them into the country. It means understanding that some regions, especially those in crisis, come with unique risks. Afghanistan is one of those regions. For over 20 years, it has been defined by war, instability, corruption, and the collapse of formal institutions. When the Afghan government fell in 2021, nearly all bureaucratic structures collapsed with it. There were no reliable databases, no trustworthy record-keeping, and no way to verify personal or professional histories. Anyone entering from that environment posed a risk, not because they were Afghan, but because the systems required to check their backgrounds simply did not exist. This does not mean most Afghan refugees are dangerous. The overwhelming majority simply wanted safety, but a rushed evacuation combined with humanitarian parole and temporary protections created massive gaps. Gaps create risk. An unmanaged risk can lead to tragedy. That is the argument behind Trump's directive to re-examine every Afghan entrant, not to demonize a population, but to identify whether the emergency evacuation overlooked critical warning signs. Whether someone agrees with Trump's approach largely depends on their wider beliefs about immigration, national identity, and government responsibility. But zooming out helps reveal the bigger picture. This incident sits inside a much larger national conversation about the kind of future America wants to build. Trump has made it clear his administration is prioritizing security, physical security, border security, societal security. His view is simple. Americans should be safe walking down the street, sending their children to school, going to work, or serving in uniform. That requires stronger borders, rigorous vetting, and removing those who violate immigration law. His critics argue the opposite, that such policies are cruel, that they betray America's identity as a nation of immigrants, and that they weaponize fear to justify targeting vulnerable groups. They point to families separated at the border, asylum seekers denied entry, and communities living under threat of deportation. They say the real danger comes from leaders who exploit fear for political gain. Both sides have stories. Both sides have data. Both sides have emotional narratives that shape their worldview. And both sides genuinely believe they are fighting for America's moral soul. But most Americans fall somewhere in the middle. They don't want cruelty, but they don't want chaos. They don't want open borders, but they don't want suffering. They want a system that works, a system that is fair, consistent, and effective. Unfortunately, the current political climate rewards outrage, not solutions. Nuance is mocked as weakness. Thoughtfulness is overshadowed by the loudest, angriest voices. And working-class families who just want safety and stability feel increasingly unheard. Looking ahead, expect several long-term consequences. First, asylum and refugee policies will tighten significantly. Humanitarian parole will be limited. Vetting will become more intense and slow. The special immigrant visa process will regain prominence. Second, tens of thousands of cases of Afghan entrants will be reopened. Immigration courts, already overwhelmed, will face new pressure. Some will be cleared to stay. Others may receive deportation orders. The process will be lengthy and emotionally charged. Third, immigration will dominate every major election cycle for the foreseeable future. Candidates will be forced to take clear, uncompromising positions. Fourth, the divisions among Americans will deepen unless leaders begin addressing each other's concerns rather than dismissing them. People who fear unchecked migration won't be persuaded by accusations of bigotry. People who fear authoritarianism won't be persuaded by calls for blind loyalty. So what can ordinary citizens do? First, stay informed, beyond your preferred media. Understanding opposing perspectives does not require agreeing with them. Second, demand accountability. If Trump promises reforms, ask for results and transparency. If critics claim his actions are unconstitutional, ask them to name specific laws and provide solutions. Third, resist simplistic slogans. Immigration is complex. Security is complex. Balancing liberty and safety has always been one of America's hardest challenges. And fourth, remember that America has survived storms far deadlier than this one. Civil war, depressions, world wars, and cultural upheavals. America bends, but it doesn't break, it adapts. This attack was tragic. 2 service members were gravely injured. The suspect, an Afghan national who entered the country through a rushed emergency process, now faces justice. Trump responded with one of the strongest national security statements of his presidency. He ordered a full review of Afghan entrants. He deployed additional forces to protect the capital. He framed the issue as a choice between safety and choose. Media outlets responded predictably, some focusing on immigration failures, others insisting Trump's rhetoric created the environment that led to the violence. But the underlying truth remains: the vetting system failed, and a failing system always demands action. Whether Trump's response ultimately proves correct will be decided by history, but doing nothing is not an option. America is at another crossroads, just as it has been many times before. What happens next depends on citizens who stay engaged, ask hard questions, and refuse to give up on the idea that this country can improve. So don't check out. Don't surrender to frustration. Talk to your children, your friends, your communities. Share your experiences, your concerns, your hopes. Because America's story has never been written by those who gave up, only by those who stayed in the fight.